Okay, so it's not possible to go through all the questions, so I will choose a few selected ones. Okay, so let's start at number 2. At all points along an indifference curve, an individual is realizing the same level of utility, minimizing cost, spending the same amount of money, all of the above 3 answers. And the answer is same level of utility, right? That's the actually definition of an indifference curve, okay? Okay. An indifference curve that is convex to the origin and negatively sloped shows constant substitutability, imperfect substitutability, perfect substitutability, none of the above. And the answer is imperfect. If it is perfect or if it is perfect or constant substitutability, how do you draw an indifference curve? So in this case, it is convex to the origin, right? Suppose the question is, let's say I just twisted that question. So if it is a straight line, okay, if it is perfect substitution, what do you mean by perfect? What is the difference between perfect substitution and imperfect substitution? When we say perfect substitution,
like you get the same level of utility.
You get the same level of utility. So you are saying that those two goods are almost identical. You don't see any difference because the level of utility you are getting from those two are equal. So if that is the case, you'll see your utility indifference curve like this, okay? So your rate of substitution is always constant, okay? It is this kind of straight line. But if it is imperfect substitution, meaning that your level of utility changes as you consume, okay, one or other, then you have imperfect substitution. Then it would be like this, convex to the origin, okay? Okay, let me go back. To determine the combination of pizzas and tacos that will maximize a student's utility, an economist must know the slope of the indifference curve, the marginal rate of substitution between pizza and tacos, and the price ratio, the slope of the relevant budget line, the marginal rate of substitution between pizzas and tacos. And price ratio, because that is the utility maximizing condition, okay? Right? If you remember, guys, we discussed that. So whenever, if I say this is Y2 and this is Y1, and this is the indifference curve, and I draw the budget line tangent to that indifference curve, let's say this is the tangent point, then at that point you get the utility maximizing bundle Y2 star and Y1, and this bundle maximizes its utility, okay? So the slope of this indifference curve is marginal rate of substitution, or MRS. Slope of the budget line is given by price ratio. Okay, so you need to know both of those to know whether that person is maximizing utility or not. The typical convex indifference curve that is associated with an average consumer gets its shape from constant substitutability of goods, the diminishing marginal utility in consumption process, the complementarity between the two goods, none of the above. And the answer is? The answer is the diminishing marginal utility in consumption process. Why is that? Again, if you look at this kind of convex indifference curve, what is happening is your marginal rate of substitution is decreasing, because as you consume more of one good, diminishing marginal utility starts to kick in. Because if you look at here, okay, at this point, you are trading to gain, let's say this is y2, y1, to gain this much of y1, you are trading with this much of y2, right? To gain, so you gain this much of, let's say, y1, you need to lose this much of y2. Now look at this point. Even to gain, let's say, gain this much of, or this much of y2 can replace this much of y1. So as you consume from this point, let's say from this point to this point, as you consume more y1, the law of diminishing marginal utility states that as you consume more of that good, your utility from that good will start to diminish, right? So that is the reason why you see this kind of convex kind of indifference curve. Okay. Okay, I think we have discussed many of these indifference curve questions. Okay, number 8 I can skip. Okay, number 10. Okay, the law of diminishing marginal utility explains why we consume a variety of food, why there are automatic checkout lanes at a grocery store, why more is preferred to less, scarcity. Why we consume variety of good. Why? Because as you consume more of y1, you kind of get fed up with y1, right? So that's why we need variety. Otherwise, if that law is not true, you will keep on consuming the same good. You don't want variety. Okay. Okay, let's look at number 14. If total utility is increasing, then marginal utility is increasing, positive, zero, negative.
Positive.
Positive. Why increasing is not the right answer here? Is it possible that marginal utility is decreasing, but total utility would be increasing? Is it possible or not? And it is possible. Why? Okay, so let me show you. Okay. This is a total utility. Okay, this is total, let's say, utility on this y-axis and goods on x-axis. So here, this is total utility. If you take the slope of total utility, what is that called? If you take the slope of that total utility curve, what is that called? Slope of total utility curve would be marginal utility, right? The slope, always remember. So look at here, total margin, there's higher slope here, right? As you go along that total utility curve, what is happening with the slope? Slope is actually decreasing, meaning that value of marginal utility is decreasing. If you calculate with numbers, you will see that marginal utility value would be decreasing, but still total utility is increasing, right? So it is decreasing, but still marginal utility is positive. It's not negative. It starts to become negative only after when this total utility, so here at this point total utility is maximum, and then after that it starts to decline, and here at these points you have negative, marginal utility is negative because it is declining, it is even becoming negative. Okay, you have negative slope for that marginal utility. Okay, so that's why the answer to this question is not increasing. Okay, you can have increasing total utility with decreasing marginal utility, but you need to have positive marginal utility. Okay. Okay, the marginal rate of substitution is the slope of the what? Indifference curve, budget line, isocost line, production possibility frontier. The marginal rate of substitution is the slope of what? Didn't we discuss that before here? This is the slope of this, this is the slope of indifference curve. Okay, if you go back to and look at your notes, you'll see that we discussed that in the class also. Okay.
It's the shouldn't be the isocost.
No, isocost. We haven't discussed isocost line. Okay. You can say budget line. The slope of budget line would be the price ratio. Okay. Okay. Let me jump to now.
Oh, indifference curve.
Indifference curve. Yes. Let me jump to 23. An equilibrium is a point where all things are equal, a point where there is no tendency to change. Ceteris paribus, a movement along the demand curve. A point where there is no tendency to change, right? Now, that's the equilibrium. Nobody wants to change because they are getting the highest level of satisfaction at that point. Okay. The mathematical representation of a consumer equilibrium is MRS equals to MU, MRS equals to price ratio, change in Y2 divided by change in Y1 equals to MU, change in Y2 divided by change in Y1 equals to TU.
Change in Y2 by change in Y1 to TU.
Is it TU or P1 by P2? Okay, don't get confused. Okay, so we said that.
It's TU.
Yes, that's not. So we said that consumer is at equilibrium whenever MRS equals to price ratio. Okay, Lane, pay attention here. Okay, so MRS is, okay, Y2 by Y1, and price ratio is P1 by P2. Okay, if you look at that options there, you don't have that option. You just have this option, MRS equals to P1 by P2, okay? So that's the condition where consumer are at equilibrium, meaning that they are maximizing their utility from that bundle of goods they are consuming. Okay. Let's look at, okay. So again, let's because this concept of MRS is very important. Let's look at MRS again. The MRS represents consumer expenditure, reflects a constant price ratio, changes value due to law of diminishing marginal utility, remains constant due to the assumption of complete preferences.
Changes value to the law of diminishing marginal.
Yes. Why? Because again, you can go back to this figure over here, okay? So MRS is the slope of this indifference curve. That's what we said, right? So the slope changes or the slope diminishes as we move along that indifference curve, okay? And that is because of law of diminishing marginal utility. So the law of so the slope of the indifference curve is equal to MRS, the marginal valuation of two goods, the rate of exchange of one good for another that leaves utility unchanged, all of the above three answer. The slope of indifference curve is equal to MRS, the marginal valuation of two goods, the rate of exchange of one good for another that leaves utility unchanged, all of the above three answers. All of the three answers, because all these three are saying the same thing, okay? Whether you say MRS, that is the rate of exchange of one good for another good that leaves utility unchanged. If you look at this here, okay? Along this indifference curve, utility is unchanged, but MRS is representing the rate of exchange between Y1 and Y2, whenever, okay? So here, you give this much of Y2 to gain this much of Y1. That is rate of exchange. Number 36, okay? Now we are coming to supply. Questions related to supply. Chapter 8, I think. All of the following are determinants of supply except input prices, income, technology, output prices. Income. So why income is the determinant of what? Demand, not the supply, okay? All others are determinants of supply except income. That is, income is determinant of demand. Okay, number 39. Agricultural research results in an upward movement along the supply curve of wheat, a downward movement along the supply curve of wheat, an outward shift in supply curve of wheat, an inward shift in the supply curve of wheat. And the answer is outward shift, right? Because the technology, it's not the movement along the demand, movement along the supply curve. So what the technology does, new technology, so let's say this is the supply curve. This is the supply curve. So what technology does is that it shifts outwards. So for the same price, the producers can supply more because their cost of production will go down because of that new technology. Okay, and this is the figure related to that question. Okay. Okay, so we have learned two kinds of elasticities, right? Point elasticity and arc elasticity. Okay, so this is question about point elasticity. The point elasticity of the supply of hamburger is equal to the slope of supply curve of hamburger, the percentage change in hamburger supply divided by percentage change in price of hamburger, the percentage change in price of hamburger divided by percentage change in quantity supplied of hamburger, all of the above answers. And the answer is
Percentage change in the price of hamburger divided by percentage change in the quantity supplied.
it's just the opposite.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, percent change in quantity, percent change in hamburger supplied or quantity of hamburger supplied in relation to percent change in price. Okay, so let's move to question 46. Okay, an individual firm will supply goods until quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. Marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost. Marginal revenue is less than marginal cost. Marginal revenue equals to marginal cost. Marginal revenue equals to marginal cost. Why? Because it is the profit maximizing level. An individual, 47, okay? An individual firm supply curve equals average variable cost above marginal cost below average variable cost, marginal cost above average variable cost below marginal cost. And the answer is marginal cost above average variable cost. Okay, that marginal cost line is same as supply curve, but it cannot go below that average variable cost because you need to at least cover average variable cost to stay in that business. Okay. The market supply curve is horizontal sum of all individual firms' supply curves, the vertical sum of all individual firms' supply curves, the horizontal sum of individual firms' demand curves, the vertical sum of individual firms' demand curves. The horizontal sum of all individual firms' supply curves. The elasticity of supply, number 54. The elasticity of supply decreases over time, tells how impossible it is to increase food supply, tells how responsive supply is to changes in weather, tells how responsive supply is to changes in price. Changes in price. Okay. An elastic supply curve is less steep than an inelastic supply curve, more steep than an inelastic supply curve, the same steepness as an inelastic supply curve, vertical. Less steep, right? Elastic is the supply curve, flatter would be that curve. For a perfectly inelastic supply curve, elasticity value equal to 0, greater than 1, less than 1, not enough information to know. 0, meaning that it will be vertical, so it doesn't respond to price changes. Let's say if it is perfectly elastic supply curve, what would be the elasticity value? perfectly elastic supply would be horizontal. In that case, what would be the elasticity value? Perfectly elastic, it would be what? Infinity, right? Infinity. If the price of shirts increases 10% and quantity supplied of shirts increases 15%, then elasticity of supply of shirt is unitary elastic, elastic, inelastic, not enough information to know. Price increases 10%, quantity supplied increases 15%. Would this be elastic, inelastic, unitary, elastic?
One still.
Elastic, because it is greater than 1, right?
Basically, relatively larger change.
Okay. Is there any question? Okay. The cross price elasticity 62. Okay. The cross price elasticity of supply of corn and wheat is positive, negative, unitary, 0. Let me explain that with a figure. Okay. So it is asking about what? Corn and wheat, right? Corn and wheat supply. Okay. So this is, let's say this is for corn. Price, quantity.
The cross price elasticity of corn.
Wheat. Okay. Wheat supply. If, let's say, price of corn increase, what will happen? Corn supplier will supply more or less. If price of wheat, the price of corn increase, more, right? So let's say P from P0 to P1, they will supply more, Q2. So if the producer produce more corn, would they decrease the acreage for wheat or not? Yes, right? I mean, in this case, actually, there should be better example would be corn and soybean rather than wheat. Okay, so they will decrease the supply of wheat from Q1 to Q2 for the same price. Okay, so meaning that increase in, so let me go back to the question. Okay, the cross price elasticity of supply of corn and wheat is, okay, so here a price of corn, so cross price, definition of cross price elasticity is what? A price of one increase, what will that do to the supply of other, right? In this, so in this example I gave you, what a price of corn increase, the supply of soybean decrease. So they are acting in opposite direction, right? Price of corn increase, supply of soybean decrease. That means they are negative, okay? So the cross price elasticity in this case is negative. Okay. Let's look at another example. The cross price elasticity of supply of steak and leather is positive, negative, unitary, 0. For example, before you answer that question, the steak and leather, are they complements or substitutes in production? Complements. If they are complements, right, a price of steak increase, will that increase the supply of leather or not? So that means positive, right? Okay. If price of oil increases, the supply of oil will increase, the supply of oil will decrease,
the quantity supplied of oil will increase, the quantity supplied of oil will decrease. So the quantity supplied of oil will increase, right? Why? Because here the increase is
Price, not the other factors. Okay, so this would be
movement along the supply curve. Okay.
You over 67.
67. Okay. The price of oil increases. There is a movement along the supply curve of oil. There is a movement along the supply curve. There is a movement along down the supply curve of oil. There is an upward shift in supply curve of oil. There is a downward shift in supply curve of oil. Okay. So as soon as you see this price of oil, and it is talking about oil,
it should be movement along the supply curve. So now would it be upward movement or downward movement?
Okay, because the price is increasing, so
The supplier would like to
supply more, so it would be movement along up the supply curve. Okay. '69. The income elasticity of demand for food is less than 0, between 0 and 1, equal to 0, greater than 0. Food.
What kind of good is food?
Necessity. For necessity, what should be the income elasticity? Between 0 and 1. Okay. If income increases, 74, okay? If income increases, then there is a change in demand for beef and a change in demand for chicken. There is a change in demand for beef and a change in quantity demanded of chicken. There is a change in quantity demanded of beef and a change in demand for chicken. There is a change in quantity demanded for beef and a change in quantity demanded of chicken. And the answer is A, right? Income changes. Income is one of the factors that affects demand. So both chicken and beef demand would be shifted outward. So it would be change in demand, not change in quantity demanded for both. Okay. The income elasticity of golf course membership is less than 0, between 0 and 1, equal to 1, greater than 1. Golf course membership, what kind of good is that? Luxury good. So it should be greater than 1. Okay. Okay. The price elasticity of demand measures how responsive consumers are to a change in price, how responsive producers are to change in price, how responsive consumers are to change in price, how responsive consumers are to change in price of other goods. And the answer is A. It's how responsive consumer, not producer. Always remember, demand goes with consumers, supply goes with producers. The law of demand states that there is a direct relationship between price and quantity demanded. There is an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. There is no relationship between price and quantity demanded. The law of diminishing marginal utility holds. What kind of relationship?
There's an inverse relationship.
Inverse relationship, right? If income increases 10% and the demand of hamburger decreases 5%, hamburger is a necessity good, hamburger is an inferior good, hamburger is a normal good, not enough information to know. Inferior, because even though income increase, they are decreasing demand for hamburgers. Okay. Okay. I think we have talked more about these luxury goods. So let's look at 90. A demand curve includes change in income, includes a change in taste and preferences, holds all else constant except for the price, is upward sloping. And the answer is, what is a demand curve?
Change in income. Oh wait.
Right? It holds all else constant except price. So when you change price, whatever quantities are demanded, that gives demand curve. Okay, and you are holding all other constant. The market demand curve is vertical, horizontal, downward sloping, upward sloping. The market demand curve is vertical, horizontal, downward sloping, upward sloping. Downward sloping, right? I mean, you just talked about law of demand, right? Okay, downward sloping. Don't forget that. Okay. Cigarettes are likely to be price inelastic, price elastic, unitary price elastic, not enough information to know. Price elastic, price inelastic. If you say Marlboro, then that may be price elastic, but cigarette in general would be price inelastic. Okay. Okay, so let's move on to hamburgers and buns have a cross price elasticity of a demand that is 1, 0, positive, negative. Hamburgers and buns, they are what kinds of goods? They are complements in consumption. Let's say if price of hamburger increase, what will that do to demand for buns? Increase, meaning that cross price elasticity is positive. Okay, they're moving in same direction. Okay, that's it for this homework, but I'll talk about some crucial concepts that you guys should not miss. Okay, doesn't mean that I have covered everything. Okay, so first concept you guys should not miss is what is marginal rate of substitution. Okay, so as we have discussed earlier, marginal rate of substitution is nothing but it is the slope of an indifference curve which gives you trade-off between two goods, right? So here, if it is y2 and this is y1, this is the slope of indifference curve, which is same as marginal rate of substitution. This gives trade-off between those two goods, y2 and y1. How much of y2 you need to give up, so this would be delta y2 to gain delta y1. So that is the trade-off rate. So it is rate of substitution between two goods that gives you same level of satisfaction. Okay, so that is marginal rate of substitution used. Another concept you should not miss is consumer equilibrium. What is the meaning of consumer equilibrium, and what is the condition, mathematical condition for that? What is that? What is the mathematical condition for consumer equilibrium? Can somebody tell me? It is what?
Delta y2 divided by delta y1 equals, is it the TU?
No, not TU.
And
You
No.
made the same mistake. Price ratio, right? So mathematical condition would be P1 by P2, meaning that you have tangency of the budget line and your indifference curve. Okay. This is where this condition is satisfied. You are maximizing your utility. So this is indifference curve, this is budget line, and you have tangency of budget line and your indifference curve, meaning that given the income you have, you are reaching the maximum possible indifference curve, or you are trying to maximize utility given your budget constraint. Okay. Third concept you guys should not miss is about difference between, because there are a bunch of questions related to these. Difference between change in quantity demanded or supplied. You can say in both ways, versus change or shift in demand or supply. Okay, one is movement, this one is movement, change in quantity demanded or supply is movement along that demand or supply curve. When we talk about shift or change in demand or supply, we're talking about factors other than the price. Okay, so you need to know about determinants of demand and supply and how those factors shift demand and supply curve. Okay, so you need to know about that. Number 5 would be elasticity. Okay, this is also very crucial. Elasticity. So we learn two ways to find elasticity. One is point elasticity, right? The formula for that is what? Let's say we are talking about point elasticity of supply, then the formula for that would be change in what? Quantity supplied, right? Change in, somebody tell me, price times price by quantity supply. So you can replace this quantity supply with quantity demand. Okay, that would be point elasticity of demand.
so we have to know that mathematical formula.
Not only that, we did the math in using some examples, right? You need to know how to do those calculations, okay? Just like what we did in the class. And then arc elasticity. The formula is what? Quantity supplied by price. So far, it is the same formula. The only difference is that you use average price and average quantities in case of arc elasticity. So you got to know how to use these formulas for those problems, just like what we did in the class, okay? Okay. Any questions? Okay. So like I said, I haven't covered all the topics from the book, but you should be able to, I mean, you should know all those 3 chapters. Okay. Okay, thank you.